teacher program, and the recording is in progress, at the Paleontological Research Institution in Ithaca, but I am actually in Buffalo, and it's just kind of a gray and 40-degree day here, and I will pass it to Jim.
Thanks, Don. Jim Callahan, Mobile Climate Science Labs, working with the 2 schools in the country, and we're looking for more. So this is not a matter of excluding others, but the 2 schools in the country that teach climate change more in depth and more advanced than any other schools that we know of yet in the school. The teachers 5 days a week, all year round. And what is possible, hopefully for COP, to you can use this in your ammunition belt in the figurative sense of what can happen when students do get good education, that they are working with the White House and they are working to make the U.S. Capitol building more energy efficient. That's a pretty big example of it. Look, students are doing what the Congress itself can't do. That's pretty amazing. If you get education, you can get a lot of great things doing. And there's more than one way to work on the government's taking action on climate change. We need to do it from the top, like at COP, but we can do it from the grassroots as well. So maybe if I could, I'm going to go over to Carolyn.
Thank you, James. Hi. There we go. My name is Carolyn, she, her. I work at the CLEO Institute, which is a Florida-based nonprofit focused on climate education and advocacy. I'm the education and curriculum manager. And yeah, sorry, I had an early morning vet visit, so my brain's a little bit scrambled for today. I'll mostly just be listening. Katie, you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Katie Wolfson, she, her. I am the School and Public Programs Manager at the UCAR Center for Science Education at the NSF National Center for Atmospheric Research. So I am in Boulder, Colorado. It's actually pretty warm today. It's very windy, but we have like a sunny, warm day after a pretty cold, snowy weekend. So that's nice and sunny. Don't think I have any updates. I know we have some folks at AGU next week. That are going to be doing posters or sharing out or just attending and work in the NCAR booth. So you might, if folks are at AG, you might see some of our folks there next week. I will jump to, let's see, Roberta, did you go yet?
Nope, thanks. Roberta Burns, Lexington, Kentucky. I do air quality education and climate education for the state agency that protects air quality in Kentucky, the Kentucky Division for Air Quality. And I don't have any announcements. So I am not sure. Gina, you haven't gone yet, have you?
I've not. Thank you.
All right.
Good to see everyone. I am Gina Fiorelli-Duramo. I am the Clean Program Coordinator, so I'm here every week. And I'm calling in remotely. I work for Ceres at University of Colorado Boulder, but I work remotely from Vermont. And I'll also be at AGU next week. Frank, did you go?
Hey, I'm Frank Granshaw from Portland, Oregon. And Don, you described our day out here too. It's gray and rainy. So I am faculty at Portland State, adjunct faculty at Portland State University, teaching climate science for non-science majors and a few other related courses. It may not look like it, but I'm actually part of the Quaker Earth Care Witness delegation to COP28. I'm doing that virtually. Talking about virtual, I stuck into the chat the link for this year's portal, which has been a interesting experience because usually I do this as a solo endeavor, but this year I've been doing it with a graduate student from University in Unity, Maine, and she has done a fantastic job. If you haven't had a chance to look at it, I really encourage you to do that. And a lot of this is on Golly. She has done a fantastic job putting together this year's portal because I've been sick for the past 3 weeks following after my mom's memorial. So I've been sort of comatose, and she's taken the ball and done some wonderful things with it. Otherwise than that, I know some of you are going to be at AGU next week, and so I'll see you there. And I'm not sure if anybody hasn't gone yet.
Is everyone gone? Yeah? No, did you go? Oh, that's right. Okay, sweet. All right, well, thanks for coming in. I just got a text from Abby, who is one of our delegates, and she's on her way back from eating, so she's going to be joining us. And I'm actually really excited about that because she is an English teacher in a public high school here in Minnesota, and she's got some really interesting perspectives on being there. But I am going to go ahead and actually just talk a little bit, and we'll see if there was two other folks that had said they might join, and I don't know them well, so we'll see if they show up, because what the work they're doing at COP is actually really cool. I think most of you on the call are familiar with climate generation. We have been sending delegations to the climate negotiations since 2009, and have really done this from this perspective of understanding that education and engagement are actually really critical parts of making the change that we want to make. And so through our work at the COPs, we send delegates that we think are going to be really creative communicators, and who are going to make this more human, this big wonky political thing, a little bit more easy to understand. And we also see it as a really cool opportunity for learning in the classroom, to actually have, like, on the global stage, these kind of big questions to be asked, like who's at fault, who is impacted, what does fair mean, and what can we do, like what do we want to do about this. And so we've created a toolkit for educators in using this. I teach a course through Hamline University during the COP called Global Climate Policy and Solutions, which is kind of running through that and doing kind of remotely watching the COP happen. And then for those folks that are familiar with Action for Climate Empowerment stuff, that's been going on the last couple of years here in the US, we've been kind of bringing together, I think, a really cool group of folks that are thinking about that. We know that the United Nations actually recognizes that the work that we all do in education and training and public awareness is actually recognized as critical, and that at these negotiations, there is actually the opportunity to influence how ACE is being implemented or used for action in different parts of the world. So that is another reason why we send delegations. So our program is really focused on bringing together the participants, those delegates that we badge and send there, with stakeholders that they meet and stakeholders they represent, with stakeholders at the UN, and provide this opportunity for them to learn and be ignited by this experience, but also for those that follow them to similarly be, ignited and learn through their eyes, through what we call that window, through a window into COP. So this year, COP is being held in a petrostate, the United Arab Emirates, in Dubai. It's fraught with all sorts of controversy, I would say, because of that, but that's not unlike any COP. As far as the role that fossil fuel companies are playing in these spaces, I would say this year it's just maybe more in our faces because of where it is. And this year we were really excited to be able to bring this intergenerational focus, I think, forward. And so our delegates come from anywhere from college age up into those that I think are members of or could be members of AARP. So across the spectrum, we have artists and authors, community organizers, city staff work representing workforce development, and a really, I think, dynamic a group of folks that have been so fun this first week just to hear from. And to kind of share a couple, things that have been front and foremost so far. Yay, Abby's here. There's been obviously a lot of discussion. Hey, Abby. This time for hey, Abby. I'm just introducing everything. Abby's got palm trees behind her. She's authentically coming to us from Dubai. Militarization and conflict is front and foremost. The COP is very clear about not shaming any particular country, about different flags being used, but there still is some pretty clear discussion. It was National Day, there's fireworks. From someone who's watching what's happening from here, it's just a really wild place, and I'm excited Abby will be able to tell us a little bit more about it to see experience. As usual, there's been some top decision makers there. There's a big panel yesterday on women that included Secretary of State Clinton, and Kamala Harris was also there for a few days as well. And one of the things before I kind of turn it over and let Abby talk, not to put her on the spot, is that we've been excited to support this year is at the COP, there's different pavilions, so places where people can do presentations. And this is the first year that there's an entertainment and culture pavilion. And so it's been featuring the role that entertainment and culture can play from that communications angle, but also just the industry itself and how it can make change. And as I mentioned, two of our delegates week one are published authors, Erin Sharkey and Diane Wilson, and they have been able to speak at that pavilion about their work and the role of nature writing and environmental writing, of Black and Indigenous voices in the movement. So that's a cool thing. So I don't know who else these other folks that I heard from are here, but I want to introduce and just put her on the spot and give you a chance to speak. Abby Hartzell. Abby, I just threw in some slides from yesterday in here, if you wanted to have them, and we can take the slides down too if you want, but I think they might be interested in how you're doing teaching stuff. But Abby is with Fridley High School in Fridley, Minnesota. She's an English teacher. She's amazing. It's 10 p.m. her time, and we're super, super psyched that she chose to come join us. And I'm just going to turn it over to you, and you tell me, talk as much as you want or as little as you want. This is a group of folks who all work in education, whether it's at the college level or working directly with classrooms. So they know your speak. They know you as an educator.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kristen. What a treat to be here with all of you. I am just always honored to get to know more people who are in the climate literacy community. And so the main reason I wanted to be at COP was to engage more deeply in that work. And so as you can see on my bio, I'll just briefly mention, I teach language and literature at Fridley High School. I teach mostly 9th grade. I'm very involved in teaching climate literacy, which is in my practice, the philosophy of teaching about climate change in an English classroom through stories and through analyzing texts. Students are going to get exposure to climate, hopefully in so many different ways and interdisciplinary ways. But I think in an English classroom, it can be particularly powerful for students to get exposed to it through analyzing stories and connect to climate change as a social issue and as a justice issue, in addition to a scientific problem. So that is my work. And I will give you like a little overview of my experience at COP. I have tried to create a schedule for myself every day where I'm maximizing my time and like getting to see all of these amazing events and panels. And I've really been guided by what my students have been curious about. And so on this page, on this like photo, you'll see that like on the bottom left hand, I have a screenshot of like the schedule that I've made. Like every day I'll like check the schedules and put on things that I want to go to and like plan on which pavilions I want to visit. And then a kind of fun bonus is that I've also gotten to be with my sister a little bit because she's part of the US delegation. And so we got to sit down with the Climate Gen folk and her and talk a little bit about like what COP looks like from a negotiator's perspective, which is pretty different than what it looks like from an observer's perspective. So it's kind of an interesting contrast. But if you go to the next slide, Kristen, you'll see that for me, what I'm driven by really is like bringing this back to my students and giving them a taste of what it's like to be here. I think that getting to see their teacher in a place that is so different from where they are is going to be memorable for them and will help to instill these kind of like long-term memories related to climate change, which then continues their interest in it and hopefully will inspire them to take more classes on it and just get involved in climate in whatever way that looks like for them. But on the left, the way I've been kind of processing COP for them is I have this tiger stuffed animal that is the mascot of my high school, and I've been taking photos of it around COP in quite a whimsical way. It's been very fun to do it. I will often go to pavilions and talk to the people who are at those pavilions and then introduce myself as a teacher, and then sometimes we'll take a photo with the tiger. And it's a way for me to like kind of put the focus on what I'm seeing and observing without just like taking a bunch of selfies. And then on the other side, you see another screenshot of a spreadsheet. This one is all the questions that my students have asked. I have a ton of students and I have 87 questions that they have asked me to find the answers to at COP. So I sent out a survey to them the day before I left, had them complete the survey. And they range in topic. I went through and I kind of organized them by topic. And you can see the ones that are up on the screen are money, representation, and Indigenous topics within the greater topic of climate justice. And the questions are fascinating. They range in topic, in seriousness, in complexity, and I have just had such a joy being guided by them as I go through COP. And the one that you can kind of see on the screen, do big world leaders know the big impact climate change has on poor nations? Another question is, how does climate change affect countries with poverty more than it affects countries with money? There were some great questions about Indigenous people. Would it be possible for Indigenous people to help, or would it be possible for Indigenous people to get funding to take care of their environment? Like all of those questions, I would like go to panels and ask them and like talk to people who are experts. And so that's been my lens for COP, which has given me like a really cool purpose, a little bit beyond just kind of like going to like learn about it for myself. I'm not sure how much time you want me to speak, Kristen. I have like a couple other things I could mention.
Yeah, we have literally until 1, but you don't have to stay on, like as long as you want to stay on, basically. There's another couple of folks that may show up, but honestly, right now you're the show. You're the show, Abby. So like share whatever you want, and I'm sure folks might have questions for you too. But I can stop sharing it and just be in discussion too. So
yeah, well, I'd actually love to share with all of you my experience today. I went to a networking breakfast about ACE. Is that something you all are familiar with? ACE, under the like the UN body, Action for Climate Empowerment. And throughout COP, I'd been looking for ACE. I was like, where are they? Where is the organization that's running ACE? Do they have a pavilion? Is it going to be through some sort of side event? But really the only event that I saw in the whole schedule was this networking breakfast, which I'm really glad that Kristen sent to me. So I signed up for it and I attended it this morning. We're sitting at these round tables, all sorts of people there sitting at this table. And there was a woman who's part of a Catholic organization in Italy trying to increase climate empowerment through religion. There was a man who's literally working on climate literacy and tiger habitat preservation. So obviously I took a photo with him and the stuffed tiger. There was a a woman who's working on like biodiversity education in India, and then there was a woman who's working through UNESCO to create this global kind of intention statement about ministries of education including climate literacy standards in their curriculum across the entire world. And I was just like floored. I was so excited to hear about that and like really wanted to learn more. And so I kind of got to talk to her. And so she is working on right now doing kind of like a mini stock take of what's already happening in different countries. Turns out that the UAE actually has really robust climate literacy curriculum, and Italy already federally implemented. And then I was asking her, like, is there a precedent for this? Like a precedent for some sort of like global mandate, whether or not it has any like legal teeth to it, but like a mandate for curriculum standards on a particular topic. And she was saying that like in the 70s, there was a document that came out that was encouraging nations to include international peace, like international peace curriculum standards in their social studies. And apparently that was, you know, laid the foundation now for this climate related one. There's also some history of like human rights curriculum, as I'm sure you all are like familiar with. And so this, I think, kind of like is now building off of those two foundations. But other than that, that's been my one kind of exposure to specifically education and climate literacy. What I think was missing from COP, at least from like what I was able to see, was sort of any pavilions that are specifically geared towards educators or what classroom climate literacy looks like. I was also I went to the UAE pavilion about climate education in the green zone, which was very much about like science education. And so as an English teacher teaching about climate change, like through stories and through text analysis, that was definitely something that like I was not witnessing, and have not met another teacher. And I know that there are other teachers there. I think it's just sometimes hard to like find everyone. There's like 100,000 people. So there's limitations. But anyway, that's kind of what's on my mind. And this was like off the cuff. Like I have not processed this at all out loud with anyone because I was by myself at COP today. So thank you for listening to my kind of like rambling on that. But I do think that there's maybe a gap to be addressed in terms of like the international community's awareness of the importance of climate literacy education and like what that looks like at a classroom level, and how teachers can be exposed to training and professional development and things. So anyway, I'm looking at the comment. Let's see. Yeah. Oh, cool. All right. Yeah, no, I think that these things are happening in so many places. And so I got this pamphlet from the UNESCO woman. Her name was Juan, and she wanted to get feedback from educators on like what the process should be for actually like determining what climate literacy looks like in all these different countries. And so I do plan to kind of do some looking around in the US and like thinking about like what are some ways that it's implemented in the curriculum, and how can I share my knowledge with that process through the like survey thing. Oh yeah, can I get some questions? People have some questions.
Yeah, for sure. Go for it. Take them. Frank, take it away.
Okay, I was starting to put them in the chat, but I'll ask them in person. So, Abby, I'm assuming that when you're talking about ACE, you're talking about Action for Climate Empowerment, not the Action for Climate Emergency or the alternative.
I actually met a woman from Action for Climate Emergency yesterday, but yeah, I'm talking about the UN ACE for this morning.
Yeah, and at that event, was there actually anybody there from the UNFCCC?
That's a great question. There might have been.
From
We were all at
Secretariat
various
talking about.
tables. We were kind of like siloed, and so I wasn't aware of like who else was there besides the people at my table. But yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
I know that our the ACE negotiator for the US is at COP. Marcy Kim, is that her name? Marcy Kim. But ACE is not as much on the docket this year. It was more in Glasgow, and I believe last year there was like some rulemaking going around with ACE, but I know it's not as much. But I'm surprised to hear about education not being as front and center. It's not, has it had been Youth and Education Day yet? Did I miss that? That's next
I
week,
don't
isn't
think
it?
it has. I think it's next week. So we might
Yeah.
see more of it coming up. Yeah. And I actually did speak with Marcy before COP, but I think the one thing that she had me link up with was like the youth delegation WhatsApp group, and she told me about the networking breakfast. Those
Cool.
are the two kind of things on her mind.
Frank, did you have another question related to ACE?
Actually, no. Thank you, though.
Okay. Okay, great. Tiffany, did you have that question? Looks like Tiffany popped one in. Hey, Frank Leopold.
Yeah, I can just ask it, Abby. I was just
yeah.
curious. I mean, there's been so much discussion. Oh, my camera's off. There's been so much discussion and, so discouraging about the denial of the impact of fossil fuels at this COP in particular. So what kind of discussions have you had with your fellow delegates about that, and specifically about young people? What kind of discussions have you had about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I would say like last night, Kristen was there. We had a Zoom call about our experiences at COP. And I think the last part of it, we discussed like all of the really visible ironies of this particular COP in like the fossil fuel industry. And then some of the nuance to that irony, the fact that like the UAE is, at least addressing some of these things. I think it, more recently with like the telephone call being leaked, I think it's becoming a little bit more like clear that the legitimacy of those commitments is in question. But I think that like what Sabrina mentioned yesterday that I really kind of took to heart was this idea that like the UAE perhaps serves as a country that can be an example for other developing nations more than some of our like Western, Northern European American, like the US and Canada, I guess. And so the fact that the UAE is hosting COP, even if they're being hypocritical, the fact that they're hosting it and they're putting up all of this literature about climate in the city, and they're making it a point of pride, and the fact that they're like leaders in climate education, even acknowledged by UNESCO, that to me provides a little bit of the nuance to otherwise the like discouraging irony of how like dependent the city and the country is on fossil fuels, and how little it seems like they're committing to phasing out. But there have been discussions. It feels complicated and a little bit like frustrating, and definitely like not a little frustrating, like very frustrating. And yeah, I don't think it's like a wholly lost cause.
Does anyone have any other questions? We welcomed a couple people. Lynn and Frank and Donnell, I think, came in. Just so you know, Abby Hartzell is coming to you live from Dubai, and she is a high school English teacher in Fridley, Minnesota. And so she just talking a little bit about her experience.
Yeah. Oh, Frank, did you have a question?
I do.
Watch out.
No, come on now. Be nice.
Bring it on.
I thought Minnesota was nice. You must not be from there. Yeah, I know. So here's my question. Because I mean, there's a little chat going on about that point you made about UAE being recognized as a climate education leader by UNESCO. If I caught that right, I think we're all like, can you say a little bit more about that? And then, because I was asked by Discovery Education to do professional development videos on the importance of education to addressing the climate crisis for UAE teachers, and some of the prompts that the UAE wanted were like, wow, that's pretty bold for climate action and youth leadership, and and it felt mismatched. But what's that looking like on the ground?
I'm so
What are you
glad you
hearing?
asked, Frank. I'm processing it a little bit right now. So I'll just like talk out loud about what I witnessed today. This is the first day that I've gone over to the green zone where this climate action hub is. And I went over there in tow by this woman from UNESCO that I met at the networking site. So I went there and she was like talking about, I literally asked her, I was like, what are the countries that are on the forefront of this? What are the countries that are really implementing standards for climate literacy from the federal level? And she said the UAE, and I was skeptical as well. I just had trouble picturing it, but maybe I could. Kristen, are you the host of the meeting? Could I?
Gina is.
Oh, maybe I could share my screen because I have a couple photos from today that I will show you that I think are interesting.
Cool.
Could have the ability to do that, but
Or do I?
or
Oh, I do have the ability to do that, don't I? How'd that happen?
I think anyone that joins the meeting should be able to.
Oh, are we? Oh, mine is blocked.
Oh, it's blocked? That's so weird.
I wonder if it's because you are where you are.
I'll describe it. I have my English language arts skills. Okay. So you go into this pavilion, it's like a big, kind of fake kind of castle looking building that has like all of this like trim. It's sort of sandstone, which is really different in look from the blue zone where everything's pretty neutral. And then there's like a very clear sign of like the flag of the country. This is very clearly like meant to look like Gulf state core in aesthetic. And you walk in and it's this big, similarly like decorated, like you have sort of the alcoves and the kind of features of Arabian design you might see like in a mosque. And in all of these little sections, there's these different kind of booths. So there's one for greening schools, there's one for greening education partnership, there's one for sustainability, and there's all these little computers up where kids, and there's a bunch of school groups coming in like playing with like little computer games simulating different like biodiversity projects and simulating like a polar bear jumping from like iceberg to iceberg. And the one that I walked up to was a hemp display. So there was all this like hemp materials that were on the walls, and the women who were running it were like, will you commit to stop using plastic water bottles and only use sustainable products? And they were explaining hemp, and they had all these little pieces of hemp paper that we're supposed to write a commitment on and roll it up and put it into like a tiny glass bottle. And so I did that, and then a bunch of kids came over, so I moved out of the way so they could be there. But then what was interesting is that they're featuring all these things. What I'm obviously looking out for is like English language arts related content or like literature. Like, I guess it is not necessarily English, but was not seeing any kind of like critical analysis or like, text analysis type of activities. This felt like mostly kind of like science related curriculum. But what was interesting is you like walk out of the pavilion and there's this like second story glass fronted second story that you can like look up to, and then there's all of these like fancy chairs and like fancy kind of like coffee tables and like a bunch of like Emirati men sitting around like having their coffee up there. And that was just kind of like an odd thing to witness as I was walking out of like all these things on the ground level being like education related, and then this like kind of like glassed off inaccessible part where you could like witness this like meeting happening. But I have not yet been to an event, so I don't know what like the forward facing, like public facing messaging is. What I was there just was to witness kind of the way that they've really made it very sort of like UAE in aesthetic and in like the pride of like what they're doing in their different like sectors of education. Very kind of like experimental, or not experimental, but experiential for like kids to come in and like experience all of these things. But if I do go to an event tomorrow, Frank, I can like keep you posted on what I witness and like how they're presenting their education.
It just floors me. Sorry, Frank. It just floors me that you asked that question and the answer was UAE. Given we've been at this
Yeah.
game forever and doing some of the best work in the world, and it's invisible to the world. And I get a lot of the international politics of why that is, but still, we're doing some really amazing work. And when I say we, I don't mean federal
No.
government. I'm federal, but I mean, I'm talking to a lot of leaders who are doing some amazing work in this country. But our ability to bridge that to the and be seen, it's not about recognition in as much as you could talk to us, we could learn from each other, we could collaborate, but we're just seen as a non-player, and
You know,
we got game.
I have to agree with you because I was also surprised. Like, I am so proud of the work that I'm doing and the work that I'm part of in the US with like all of these different organizations that are involved in climate literacy. And I wanted to kind of tell this woman from UNESCO, Juan, about that work. And she was saying like, oh, you're so inspiring, you're a teacher. Like, she was being very complimentary in the end. She was like, I really feel for you in the US because you don't have any support to do climate literacy. And I was like, that's not actually the case. Like, I have a lot of support. She was like, what's your state like? I was like, I'm from Minnesota and we have like, my curriculum is like very accepted by the people I'm teaching. And she was like, and I'm not sure how well she knows the state politics in the US, because then she was saying, at least you're not from California where they're banning books. And I was like, well, I'm not even going to correct you. That's Florida. But like, it is true that I think like the publicity and the narrative around climate education in the US is not aligning, especially with a woman from UNESCO, where you think she would have a sense of kind of what things are looking like globally. So I'm going to go in there, I'm going to like be part of their process. I really want to get involved and try and kind of like represent it the way that I think it should be. So
Thank
yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up. This is definitely a good thing to think
Thank you.
about.
Yep. I appreciate your dedication, and I completely agree with you. But I would even say, even in Florida, there are parts of Florida, Carolyn Burns, that are doing amazing world-class work inside Florida at the sub-state level. So it's
yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'll stop.
Just so you know, Abby, who's here in the group. So Carolyn Burns in the bottom left-hand corner on my screen is with Clio Institute, which is like fully climate change education engagement in Florida. That is what they do. And Frank, who you're talking to, is like, Frank is climate change education in the country. Basically, if you want to like a person, that's the face of. If you Wikipedia climate change education in the U.S., Frank Leopold. Anyways, so you've got the ear of believers with you here, and they're excited that you're going to be out there doing some promotion of their work. Frank Granshaw, I see your hand is up. Where'd Frank Granshaw go?
You're muted, Frank. You're muted, Frank. Frank, you're muted.
Frank, you're muted. Oh, yeah.
Okay, now we'll try it. Yeah, it's good. That definitely has become a cultural statement now. You're muted. Anyway, last night I decided to sit down and listen to the infamous interview between Mary Robertson and Al Jaber, in which he made the statement that there's no compelling science linking. Yeah, anyway, but one thing he kept saying over and over again that I'm really curious about, he said, show me a path forward, show me a path forward. And I'm thinking where he's coming from, the path forward looks very cloudy, because I mean, my impression of the Middle Eastern states is they've got a really good moneymaker, but without that really good moneymaker, they don't have much else in terms of natural resources. But what I'm wondering, has there been any conversation during the conference coming from people from some of the Middle Eastern states about a way forward that doesn't entail boosting their petrochemical capacity?
I am so glad you asked, because one of my students is from Iraq and he was asking me to go to the Iraq pavilion and find out what Iraq is doing with climate change. So I show up at the pavilion and I say, like, I have a question that one of my students was asking, and like, could someone maybe answer like what Iraq is doing for climate change? And so this woman brings me outside, there's an event going on. And so she's like, the first thing she says is Iraq is a fossil fuel dependent country and we are trying to shift away from that. And what we're doing is and I know this is where it becomes a little bit less like exciting, but she's like, we're trying to shift away from methane. We're trying to reduce our methane emissions from our fossil fuel burning. And we're trying to shift away from fossil fuels. She did not give a specific, like, what they're going to do with like implementing like solar or wind or whatever. But I think the acknowledgement of the fact that they're fossil dependent and then they need to make that shift, to me, I was impressed by that. like just, stating that very directly. And then she talked a little bit about the different initiatives that their country has to try and like encourage their like national companies that are like invested in fossil fuels to like find other investments. And so that's one example. There's also an OPEC pavilion, and I have not been there, but it's an interesting representation. And I think that Sabrina talked to someone from OPEC yesterday.
Yeah, Sabrina. So one of our delegates is Algerian, right? She's Algerian, right? Yeah. But a student at Stanford and a US citizen and young person. And she technically is a member of the OPEC state because Algeria is, and she approached them yesterday and also like left the conversation. She's like, why are you here? I'm from Algeria, but she was like, I'm from Algeria and like we're a member, and so I just want to know, like, she did it nicely or whatever. But it was so interesting. I mean, to hear you too, Abby, like your frame on meeting with these folks seems to be so optimistic, which is awesome. But like she was like, they said, that they were here to their talking points were about like figuring out how to transition to renewables, and like at least their talking points were, but she just felt like they're not like saying we're here to like, I don't know. So it's interesting to hear the perspectives from you all this year as far as your optimism about that part about them being there. So Jim,
Yes,
do you have a question?
So kind of a somewhat side question, but not terribly, is if folks who are at COP come back with any kind of discussions about this in news, it's certainly going to be valuable to us, and I think to others, is we know at COP, it's in the front page newspaper how big the fossil fuel industry is there, right? How much they are at the table. Discussion among educators from around the world, how much and in what ways is the fossil fuel industry influencing how education is being taught or not being taught? What do they do? And I'll give them some background. As I know, quite a long time ago, I checked in with some colleagues that are very good in France. And they said there's no way the fossil fuel industry has any effect whatsoever on fossil fuels in France. So I said, give me a moment. I came back the next day and I showed them all these links. So here's Shell, here's all these fossil fuel industries, and they're giving money, and they're directly here. They are doing it. You just don't look for it, so you don't find it.
Mm-hmm.
So like, what do they do? How do they do it? I will say that working with so often, having been directly contacted by the fossil fuel industry or indirectly contacted it, one of their biggest tools to control education and climate change is to insist that unless it is done to a large scale, it does not matter. Okay? Unless you have enough money and power to influence 1,000 schools or 10,000 or 100,000 schools, what you do does not matter. What a teacher does not matter. What a student does, what a group of students do, even what a school district does not matter. It is only things that are large, which, if you think about it, why would they do that? Because they are the ones that can scale. They can outscale the federal government every time, and they do. Even in DC, where I teach 2 schools, I've looked around at what is being taught in the DC schools around climate change. the dominant influencer in education in Washington, D.C. is the fossil fuel industry. What the schools are mostly using are fossil fuel industry funded and promoted resources and curriculum. That they dominate even in Washington, D.C. So what are their arguments and how do they do that? It's a kind of a thing of, it's the chance to talk with colleagues internationally. What are they doing in your country? What are you looking for and have you seen it? If we don't know what they're doing, how can we take them on?
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
That's a really good point. Did you want me to respond to if I've had any conversations at COP about it, or
Well, as you're doing it, things it's kind of noting there's at a conference like this, there's a lot of things we can be doing, right? There's a lot of people we can talk to, and there's a lot of different things. Now, just to give you, Abby, you gave a response in that you see this is important and this is a big question. That's a response, and one I like hearing.
Yeah, no, 100%. Like I think the whole education, like the whole climate literacy realm to me is so fascinating because there's so many layers to it, from like we were talking about UNESCO, like trying to be like this global, like international layer, to what it looks like on the federal level, to the state level, to the school board level, to the individual teacher who comes in. And for me, my experience has been as an individual teacher who's just passionate about climate change because I got exposed to it when I was younger and I took classes on it in my master's, and I felt like I had the tools and the resources to teach curriculum. That was completely grassroots. None of it was coming from standards that I was trying to meet. None of it was coming from my principal or my department head or anything above that. And so I kind of like snuck under the radar. And if I'd been having a lot of like resistance from other teachers or from parents, that would have looked really different. So I feel lucky in that way. But I think, what you're bringing up is this like the scale and like what scares the fossil fuel industry, or not what scares them, but what they think matters is like on the higher level. But I think like whether something's being like implemented in like a whole entire system of schools versus like it's happening in like one school. But I think the philosophy of change that the professor that I work closely with at the University of Minnesota is that if you can get it out to the teachers and then have them be teaching it in their schools, then you're not necessarily like at the same mercy of the materials being produced by fossil fuel influenced publishers, or by the standards being influenced, or by like the state policy. But at the same time, I did speak with, this is more explicit answer to your question, James, but I did speak with a woman from Canada who was at this table at the ACE brunch. She was saying that in the city, it's really easy for people and teachers to teach about climate, but like out in like the more rural areas, fossil fuel companies are so dominant in those places that it's a lot harder because the narrative around it is it's like a bigger deal to stick your neck out in that way. And so anyway, that's kind of a two-part answer, but I just love how you're expressing that complexity, and like I'm now wanting to have much more of an eye out for it. And I hope to continue to think about that.
Cool. All right, Don, I'm going to let you go. And then it's like almost 11 for Abby. I feel bad keeping her up.
Just on the U.S. context, it's worth noting that the largest school district in the U.S., New York City, has some pretty aggressive climate education policies. And I actually spent my weekend in New York City, and part of that was piloting a module for the climate change mini credential for New York City teachers that will be a three graduate course sequence starting in February. It's a collaboration between City College and the Department of Ed in New York, and PRI, and the American Museum of Natural History, and New York's city parks, and a whole bunch of other organizations. So it is interesting how fragmented it is here, but my guess is that the biggest cities in the country are better than a lot of places. So a chunk of the population is getting it, but of course it is complex.
Thanks, Don. Frank, you want to close it out here?
Yeah, just Abby, I'm so happy that you're there. But I hear where you're going, and so will you be there on the 8th?
Unfortunately, no, I'm going to be back in my classroom in Minnesota.
All right. Well,
We
yeah,
have
well, then
we have another
Yep.
teacher there on the 8th, though.
Mhm.
So on the 8th, the event that I put in the chat, the really the only event in the U.S. Center that day that relates to education and youth is the Dear World Leaders event.
Yeah.
So I would definitely encourage somebody from your delegation to be there. You can watch it on the YouTube channel, but you know it's going to be it's an interesting concept. But I mean that's where we're announcing the public release of the climate literacy guide draft. It won't be until January. I mean, I am getting grayer by the day trying to get that thing through the government right now, but it's in process. When it's bold. I'm not sure how bold it's going to be at the end, but but you know the public is going to give us a lot of feedback, and so if you're in your work, you want to announce that it's open to the world. We're building it for the world, not just for the United States, because it moves through the world. But that is definitely in process, and so that's we're also talking with Climate Cardinals about translating it into a lot more languages than just Spanish, like we did last time. So we're moving. We're doing a lot of
Good.
important work right now. So anyway, just if that helps you
Yeah.
raise our flag a little higher, or our
Yeah.
work, not our flag, our work, not our flag. Screw the flag.
No, that's so
What?
exciting.
You heard
really,
me.
I'm so energized by that. Like this is what I've been wanting to kind of see. I've been spending a lot of time trying to connect with as many organizations as possible to get a sense of what the network looks like for climate literacy. And I've been mainly going through these like NGOs like Climate Generation, but getting a sense of what's happening. Oh, sorry. Oh yeah, sorry. Getting a sense for what's happening with Climate Generation, or sorry, getting a sense of what's happening with NOAA and like at the government level is so awesome and so interesting. And let me know how I can plug in if there's things I can do.
Oh, we got you. Let's talk.
Abby, I know I'm a little bit speaking out of turn, and apologies, Kristen. Abby, if you ever want to come back to the Clean Network, I would personally, I don't know what other people can say, I want to know what you're teaching. How is it going? What's going with your
I would
students?
love to share.
We need to
Yeah.
hear
Yeah.
from teachers. Can you come
It's
speak with us?
it's the unfortunate part of this call always being at noon, Abby, is practicing teachers actually don't come to this call.
Yeah. I do have I've published in the Climate Literacy Journal, so I have some like published work that I could send along if that's helpful to have in writing. But yeah, anyway, that's exciting. I really would love to be involved with Clean as well, because I know you guys are doing some really awesome work.
Well, you should sign up for the listserv. I'll send you all this stuff regardless, because you're at least on the listserv and getting this stuff. But yeah, don't forget about Abby, because as you know, I won't. Next week's my last week at Climate Gen, so well, Abby, thank you so much for coming. I'm actually just glad that we just had one and we could just hear all of your enthusiasm and stuff. So thank you. Get some sleep and all that stuff. Have a great last day. Last day tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. I appreciate
Awesome.
all of you. Have good
All right.
afternoons.
Bye.
Bye.